All right, welcome everyone at the next multi-networking community sync. Today is April 10th, and today on the agenda we have a continuation of the discussion about DRA integration. That's a mouthful. So last week we had a demo from Lionel. The recording on YouTube. I'm not sure was that. It's eventually going to show up on YouTube. The link on the where was that? There's a link as well. I had it somewhere. Oh, here recordings with pre-filtered YouTube recordings. If you want to look at that, but through that demo, what we kind of identified few things. First thing was the pod status update that we are missing. Um Basically, we want to know what are the kind of IPs are available inside the pod so that we have, and we would like to have the one spot for that information so that we don't have to like grab and watch multiple different objects for that. And I think the other item that we did discuss was the claim being done on the container level, but I think there is it's not a big deal to have it on the pod level since some of the net devices stuff are namespace scoped for the pod. They don't have to be per container. So we need to have them defined on the pod level. And I think the last thing that we have identified is the default CNI still runs. And I think this is what I added. Let me just remove this one. This was talked about last week. If you have any other topics to add, please feel free to just add yourself, add your item. So I want to continue on the DRA discussion. I think in terms of the default CNI stuff, what I want to call out here for this one is the fact that what Lionel showed in demo was we ran the CNI the way it was run, and then I'm not sure at what was the order. Was it before or after the CNI? But basically, the DRA stuff was somewhere as an additional item, right? Which basically presumed that got the namespace ID, the network namespace ID, to which he passed to the Multus, and then it configured all the required stuff, whatever it was, the interfaces, IPs, what's not, routes inside the namespace. So that was done through Multus, and then the default CNI was still run, right? Something that should not be the case, right? Our kind of design, what we created without the DRA, assumes that pod network defines what you get inside the pod. So, and the list of that interfaces that you want to connect is explicit. So it's not like, I think with Multus, if I'm not mistaken, there is a way to do that, but it's an option to do that, right? It's not like an explicit by design setup thing. Yes, Lionel.
Just to mention, it was not the default port network that was run. It was the CNI config was in the network attachment definition. So I was still
Okay.
using different
Oh,
configuration for default.
so
And then
basically so are you saying the standard? So because kubelet did, or maybe I will ask differently. Was kubelet calling through container D, or was it I think today is from container D or container runtime. Wasn't it running the CNI at all?
the default one, yes, I haven't touched to the default one. And then the one that
So this is
I
what I'm referring to, right?
right, okay, but for that one, I think it's two separate issues. It's the one that describe how the network is defined, and then how to handle the default CNI case, which is a bit different because we have to handle the legacy port status, which is, I mean, it has to be handled in a specific way. The
So
default
this is what
category.
I'm trying to exactly. This is what I'm what I am trying to kind of drill down onto, right? There shouldn't be it has to be transparent. It has to be backward compatible. And B, I want the DRA to, if we go that path, I want DRA to take it over, right? I want it to, you do everything from DRA. There is no alternative, right? There is no like legacy path. Legacy path basically is integrated in such a way that it still works, but there is no such thing like a legacy. And this is where I assume that KNI could step in and kind of sort it out. And this is something that I think this is something that I think even Antonio was alluding towards. What if we had a different path um, for DRA that would handle networking, right? For this, right? For normal, it will just do what you did and follow the default path. But then if I see it's a type network or something like that along those lines, it will just go to the K9 or something that will handle the networking through that. That's what I was thinking along those lines. But before I move on, Moshin, how you right? You had a hand.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I lower it first. No, I mean, we could describe these different options. What would it mean? The multi network is a set of extended network beyond the default, backward compatibility, and still somehow all internal cluster connectivity is within the default CNI, whatever it is. Then the second option, would we like to also segment the internal networking, meaning that certain pods belong to a network through the multi-network and the whole communication, because it could be get tricky where there could be advantages with keeping the defaults, meaning all your workload, including anything you bring from the community, is set by that default CNI, and whether it's metrics, logs, stacks, etc., etc. And the multi-network could eventually start by addressing external connectivity, like the traffic separation, multi-tenancy from the outside world. The other option, which probably when we start, okay, I want one network, you need to align all your workloads because somehow they will need to communicate with each other internally. So if you set a group of pods with net 1, another one with net 2, there will be a bridge in between them where whether they need to access Cube API or something else. So it will be good to put all the options and let's help each other trying to describe the use cases as you have asked for, and what will it mean for services, for endpoints, and all of that. At least on a very high level, and then understand if KNI or extending the CNI spec or going through Malthus or DRA, it's the applicable options. Or yeah,
So, Moshin, I will call you out on this a bit. We did all this for the last foreseeable like a year or so. So I would ask you to go through this KEP PR. I'm not sure you
yeah,
had a chance to read through this phase one. It has
not
all the
in all
requirements,
details, but yes, yeah,
and basically it defines all the use cases, the requirements out of those use cases, and our first phase on what we are proposing to do. So this is what we had kind of defined, and what you're asking for, I think it's most of this is already there. I would not want to go through that again. So this is a discussion that I think we already had. All right. So I would not want to revisit that because I think we are at the stage where we know what we want to do, and now we just want to look at how we want to integrate with the array for that. Okay. And I'm not sure unless something's still missing from that definition in that KEP. Let us know then, and we can slightly dig into it further on. But I think that's already there, and at least I had the impression, and I'm in the state where I think those all that you ask for is already defined.
sure. Sure, Moshe.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll take further look in it. I've been reading it. Maybe maybe I need to be careful more on the exact scope and how we are to define whether default CNI it's existing in all the use cases
Right.
or explicit. I would like to have one single interface, whatever that is from the multi-network.
Right. So quick and high level TLDR, we want the multi-network to fully define, represent a network connected to the pod. It should not be a side loaded multi-networking is what we do today. We want to improve on that. That's the core kind of goal of this work group, to ensure that, because what you're kind of describing and going towards a case where, okay, let's have multi-networking, we already have that. Multus already defines all that. So there is no point of reinventing the wheel just with different group or with within the slash the Kubernetes org, because I assume the Multus, all of us are aware of that, and that's already existing. We want to have and move a step forward. We want to define and have a handler of a network inside the Kubernetes. That's the core of this effort, right? And this is what we are striving for, because everything else we already have. That's kind of how I'm feeling. I hope that's I think that's most of this group's feeling as well, where we want to now evolve that even further, right? We want to now have a proper definition, like we have definition for a node. I want to have a definition for a network, right? I want to know that I have a default network, and we called it pod network in our CAP, that if you don't specify anything, I connect to that default pod network, and you get explicitly called out in the pod, oh, you connect to this networks, and if you don't specify anything, you connect it to the default pod network. Read through the CAP, it calls all this out right there. And basically, now what we're trying to do here is how we can leverage the DRA to achieve all this, right? Same way, right? And to achieve the same goals, because if we just do a side loading of the multi-networking to Kubernetes, we already do that today. We don't need another spec for that. So let's
No,
be clear on that.
I agree. I mean, with limitation, of course, all the
Sure, yeah. There needs to
alternative.
be some caveats, yes,
Yeah.
and all that, but because we cannot revolutionize everything at one day, but yeah, phase is all small phases, small steps on to kind of achieving it. So going back to the default CNI, Lionel, I didn't get. I think this is what I mean by that default CNI here, where we still go through the CNI. There should not be, if we go with the DRA route, there should not be two ways how the pod networking is configured. In your case, that's, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, in your case, that's the case, right? You have the DRA path that goes through and configures Multus and triggers Multus, and then you have let's call
Yeah.
you call it legacy approach, where it went through the container runtime, it called CNI and did its own stuff, right?
Yeah, this is correct. Yes.
Yeah. So that's what
Yeah.
I'm referring to here. Default CNI still runs, and maybe not default. Let's call it maybe let's like because I like that word. Legacy CNI
Yeah.
still.
I think if we want to disable this, we would need to have a way in the container runtime to disable CNI.
Right. Or being able for the CNI to leverage wherever the DRA exposes, right? Because
Yeah, but
it can go both ways.
each time you create the pod using the CRI API, the CNI will be called behind.
Right.
If the or you and then the container runtime will return the IPs, and then the pod status will be updated using that. So for me, you should disable the CNI first in the CR, and then the second part to me would be to have something a bit generic in DRA, would be to have the ability to add default resource claims in the pods. So you can add any resource claim in every post that will be created in a cluster, and you can have as a resource claim this network claim.
Oh, that's and how is that defined? So that's
It's not you have we I mean it's something that has to be done because it's I haven't seen any
oh, it's
feature
not
here
there.
yet.
What you're saying is something that
Yeah.
we could do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean it will
Okay.
be generic because it will everybody could do it for any resource claim. So it could be
Mhm.
I don't know a GPU or something. It's not specialized for networking here.
Nathan?
I had a potential question says, how do we want to position ourselves regarding CNI implementation? Because so the thing I'm a bit afraid of is if we call legacy CNI and DRA and we sort of split the path, that will probably create some kind of flag day for CNI implementations, which will have to implement basically that forbids to have a partial implementation of multinet.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
when we think about that, and this is what I was, and that's a fair point, right? How we would do that. I would assume we would have to identify, I think, something called, I was thinking, there's, I think, type or control, I think, type for the claim, right, Lionel? I think, what was, is it the type or
It's a class.
class? Oh, thank you.
It's
So,
the one that will handle the array. Yeah.
so what if we were to create networking class and then inside the array, we would say it will, the array would have some special handling for it.
And calling the CNI, the CNI API behind the scenes for the default one.
Right. So, because keep in mind here, we are identifying the APIs here, right? So that's what we are calling out here. So let's just focus on that. How can we do the backends? Lionel showed us you can create your DRA the way it is. I wonder whether there is some stub some fake you can create for a container runtime so that it trigger and return 0, right? And do nothing, right? I wonder whether that's the case. Is that possible through container runtime, so that I'm referring to your about your point of partial implementation, because I agree with that. I want to have that as well, so that DRA would have the special class. Let's say the DRA would not do anything for it. And then I have my agent that basically is being, so this is where maybe the DRA would call my agent or something, send a signal to my agent with some information of the pod. And then my agent looks at the pod, sees the DRA and translates everything accordingly and plugs in everything into the pod. And then at the end, populates the pod spec with status, right, of the IPs, right? So that will be my partial approach, right? So and this is what we're planning in MyCap, right, as well. We provide some APIs. The CNIs can implement on top of that. And then we are proposing, and that was just a proposal in terms of they could do it, but they don't have to the CRs on how to modify the CNI. I want to, and what you said, I want to make us independent. I don't want to make big changes to the DRA like they doing, where I will now define how the, let's say, KNI is gonna work, because that's gonna be another year to define the KNI and how it's gonna handle right things. I don't want to go there. So I would want to define just the API so that the CNIs can partially support it and move on. And then we will wait for whatever is going to be in the kubelet side on who's going to handle the special networking class eventually, right? Whether that's going to be the CNI and that's going to evolve somehow, or will that be just the DRA and through that, right? And of course, there is a side of something that we already have an issue with, where your CNI for every pod creation requires API access, right? So that causes some issues, right, in this world. Some CNIs, like Multus does it as well, because it has to pull the network attachment definition, right, for whatever it does, right? So most of the kind of CNIs kind of has to have access for every CNI add. The CNI itself has to make a API call to get some data, right? The evolution of the CNI to KNI or what's not maybe could remove that, right? Where KNI gets all the information about DRAs, about the networks, about the parameters, and then based on that, without extra call from the CNI at that point, kind of, I'm putting quotation mark, whatever that's going to be, doesn't have to now make the API call to set up the whole networking, right? Because it has all the information from the KNI. KNI already prepared everything you needed, and then you do your own stuff, right? I would imagine that will be the future kind of evolution of this, right?
Right.
Any comments to this?
Yeah. Okay, I would say that I still see a possibility that this does not converge and that we end up in a situation where there is a bit of both, so legacy CNI and DRA living
So
in
no, so
parallel.
this is where I think the network class identification
Hmm.
would have to be set, right? Because that can be the first step, right? We identify this is a special class for which DRA doesn't do anything, or and based on which then K9 does something as well, right? And that's an internal class that then being understood by kubelet, because maybe then it can, okay, oh, this is the DRA class that I do. No, this is networking. That means I have to pass the whole thing to the CNI. Maybe that can be the case eventually. Something along those lines. But I would like to have this will be my identification that this DRA claim is responsible for networking for the whole thing, right? That's something that would that's how I mark my claims as pod network, basically, because that's what I want to achieve, right? I want to have a pod network, and how do I achieve it? And I think the only way that I see that is through this class that will identify my pod, because that was always the case what we'd have, right? Where I would have my pod network. This is basically my DRA claim class networking that points to some parameters, and that's it, right? And I agree with you that maybe there can be a case where what I want to say, and I think I would count on Michael's not here on the K9 work to kind of create the evolution of the underlying infrastructure, right, of the kubelet side, on then to integrate with this. So this is where I would imagine this would somehow evolve and would understand those DRA network classes. Any other comments on this?
Just I have not the picture in front of me, but so the class will be then the responsibility of CNIs and KNI to handle, because somehow they will come in to the picture. I'm just trying to understand if there will be some direct requirements on, for example, the CNI spec need probably to start dealing with this part as well.
So I think here we would have to have an agreement with the CNI, and I think Doug, I assume that's you or maybe Michael Zappa as well, to have a agreement, a contract between us that, yeah, here we will just create APIs. And are you okay with your API being based off of this class, right? What do you think, Doug? Is that something that will be the right thing to do?
I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the class idea, but I think that it's wise to have this two-way communication here between these groups regarding you know, how CNI can move forward, because there's also, you know, discussion there. So,
Right.
yeah, it doesn't sound unreasonable.
So I would assume, machine, I would assume initially we would not, this proposal, this integration would not propose direct changes to the CNI, where you would just directly could integrate. You would have to have, you would have to wait for the CNIs themselves, like say Multus with the TIC approach, right, where they have their own agent to understand this class, right, and then
Mm.
you would move on from there.
Okay. No. No,
And
it was more how to move stepwise. So at least
oh
you know.
no, so
Yeah.
stepwise, so I think in that manner, I don't want to make big of large changes in the DRA environment, right? Because I don't want them now suddenly, yeah, you include that whole network class handling in your cap, right? I don't want to do that because that's just going to blow up, right? I would not want to go there. I would prefer just saying, okay, can we at least define a special hard-coded class name that then is only for us, and that means that you're trying to plug in a network to the pod, right? And it identifies the network for the pod. And if you have enabled multi-networking, or maybe it's all will be always there, if you don't specify any claim into the pod spec, you always will get a claim with that class identifying the default network, right? The default pod network that you try to always connect to, right?
Maybe rename class with type, because class is the DRA resource claim handler. You know, it's the controller plus driver. It's the components that you deploy to handle your resource claims.
And this is what, because I agree, right? So or something like that, Ryan. I agree with you. So maybe there can be, what we could modify is, could we add another field called type, right? Which will be just for us. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the type would help for another problem, which is the status. Each type could have its own status in the resource claim.
And that's fair as well. Keep in mind the status here, and let me draw parallels. Let me show you where do I have this. Can I draw parallels? Yeah, let me show this this stuff. So if I were to say here, right, this is our current proposal of the pod network. Can you see that on screen? Am I sharing
Yes, we can see it.
cap? So basically, pod network will be replaced by claim, and with the type, let's say networking dot io Kubernetes or something, that will replace this, right? And what you're saying, for that type of claims, we provide our conditions, right? And keep in mind, this is a conditions only for the status of the claim. I would not want to hold an IP over there. That should not be the case. IP should still, again, should be properly provided on the pod spec, right? I have a, where do I have an example?
For this, I asked the question during KubeCon,
like
and the answer that I understood is that we cannot have pod status if there is no usage of it in the pod spec.
No, there is, because now it won't. It
Yes.
will not be called. It will not be called networks. No, I agree with that. That's a fair point. But the spec will have a reference for it, because what it will say, the status, what it will say is, I have the array resources called on this pod, and for each of those guys, I have a referencing IP.
Mm-hmm.
So you see how right here you have networks.
Yeah, I mean, I understand
this
that.
word. Yeah, and then basically it will be that.
I think it will be hard. I think it will be hard to get this into the pod status. The resource claim will be easier, I believe. But
No.
I mean, I don't know. Just a guess.
So the resource claim is already there. Keep in mind what the integration with DRA would mean. I'm not. This is what we proposed initially. Right now we are trying to integrate with DRA. So what changes is here. This whole section changes, because this whole section, this whole changes is being replaced by the DRA claim, right?
Yeah, I understand. I understand this. I'm just saying that having a new field in the pod status for networks will be way more complex than having a network status in the resource claim.
But then that doesn't give me anything, Lionel. And basically, I had that today with Multus. That's my reply to this. If you say that, and I agree with you, that's easy to do, but that's there is no added value for me then to move towards this claims. What's the point of that?
The value added is that resource claim is natively in Kubernetes, and you have a special field for networks in the resource claim, so you can fetch the IPs in a common way.
But then I still keep in mind that the goal was to have, but that means I don't have a representation of a network, because I want to push and force through that aspect, which everyone's not ever. That's
you
the
have
point,
it because your pod points to a resource claim that is owned only by this pod, and you have the pod status with the IPs. That's the value added with the common way to report the status in the resource claim.
And that's, you would think that's fine, but it's not in terms of like scale as well, because right now what has and managing all that, it's nightmare then, right? Why is that? Is because now, and that's by the way, the claims, keep in mind what happens here as well is our push towards claims is a what I want to say, it's another scale issue as well. Keep in mind, we would want to have the default claim created for every pod in the cluster. And if we were to create a claim per each, and this is what I saw through the array, that's another thing I can mark as a gap. Today we have the template and we have each claim created per each pod, right? The thing here, what I'm seeing between those two things, let me see this guy, this picture here. A claim is basically our pod network attachment. It's because pod network attachments is basically what I want to say is you can have for a specific network, so for a specific template, you should have only one pod per pod network attachment in a pod. Though you can have multiple pod network attachments, but each attachment just points to a different template. So that means that a single pod, or maybe otherwise, a specific pod network attachment can be referenced by only one pod, same as claim. A specific claim can only be, you showed that, right? A specific claim can only be referenced by only one pod, right?
Yes.
And that means that I have to have a claim per each pod. So I double just number of the worst resource in the cluster, right? Pods is I think the most kind of scale-wise troublesome object in the cluster, and I'm doubling that because for each pod I will have to create a claim, right? Because keep in mind, I want to create a claim for each default interface as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, I understand all this problem, that maybe this could be discussed with DRA because GP or PCI devices and volumes, etc., might have similar issues, and it would be interesting to.
So with those things, keep in mind there will be usually what we are seeing is you're gonna have one pod per node for the GPU. So basically, at that point, it's not an issue, right? The problem happens when you have 100 pods per node. And then you have to have 100 pods times 100 times twice, and then times number of nodes. That's an issue, because if you were to just create this for, let's say, GPUs, it's usually just one per node, right? Maybe depending on how many GPUs you have and how you define that, but that's usually one per GPU or something like that, right?
But you could get I'm sorry. You could get the same with FPGAs if you have virtualized FPGAs and you want to have a lot of them.
Sure, you can, but basically, how far?
This data we're talking about is aggregated in the pod. There's one per pod. So actually, if you could get it into the pod spec, it would be better because it doesn't really serve a purpose outside. I mean, if it was like the template, I understand, because the template is something that spawns an individual data type.
Yeah.
So
So this is where I'm seeing the parallels in between the two, right? And we initially wanted to have the pod network attachment, but that was, and basically it is here, but pod network attachment is a kind of one-off. If I want to have some more specialized configuration on a specific pod level, but by default, I will usually reference a pod network, which is just one object, right? And basically pod can reference that guy, and that's perfectly fine. You doesn't, unless you don't need any per pod specialized information, you have your pod network. Though you could as well go with a case, because now I reminded myself, that's why I'm kind of, why we have 0 to infinity here in terms of relations, is because pod network attachment can be one per pod, or you can create a pod network attachment that's kind of creates a subsection, sub configuration for your pod network, and then you can have multiple pods pointing to one pod network attachment. Sorry, I forgot about that aspect. But with claim, you cannot even do that, right? You have always, it's always one-to-one, right? So that's kind of an issue where this, what we want to try to kind of address the kind of the scale concern as well with this one, where by default you have just one object, everyone references that one object, which is, for example, the default network, right? And I don't have to create multiple ones. And by the way, in that model, then we couldn't include IP in the spec, right, as well, because one object cannot hold all the IPs for all the pods, right? So, and that's useless, kind of. So
Shouldn't we look at the same as being done with the CSI for storage? I mean, PVC to PV, one-to-one mapping, but still, I mean, you will have PVC for each pod. I mean, the claim, but still, the binding to a PV could be reused by many pod networks, or?
So yeah, I think this is what the array went with, right? Didn't they? And correct me. Can you remind us, because I'm not so familiar with PVC? Do you create one of the objects per pod as well?
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of the problem, right? Keep in mind, again, the number of pods that's going to have the GPU resource or that's going to use storage is much lower than the general population of all the pods. Keep in mind, in our case, we want to create a claim per each interface in the cluster, right? So, and it doesn't matter whether you have something or you don't. Every interface will have to have a claim. That's the scale difference, right? And that's the kind of concern on this, right? And I think the model that storage applies, I think this is where the array went with as well, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, not every pod asks for a storage need.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah. Any other comments to this? Lionel, did I hope I kind of pointed out what's
I mean, I understand the problem. So there's I understand the problem.
And then
just it was harder in the post status.
And Lionel, well, that's other thing. If we are to propose that, yeah, let's put the IP in the claim, that's gonna stay. Either we propose something that we see that is going to work, and we achieve as a long-term solution, or we don't do it at all. Because what you said, it can be done by anyone today, I assume. I assume the claims, the claim has some conditions, and you can just add your own, right? And then you create your own stuff. So basically, that's something that you could do it on your own as well, right? Here we need to come up with a solution that we see as a long term that is going to stay there.
So you cannot modify at the moment the status of the resource claim after the GRA thing goes through the controller. So from the driver, you cannot do that. And my point was to have this type and have a special field in the pod in the resource claim status to have the network.
That could be updated after the fact. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But I understand the point that it's hard to scale, etc. But yeah, I understand that.
And I see what you're saying. I wasn't aware of the status immutability. But as I referred, as I'm mentioning, we should propose something that we see long term works for multi-networking. I don't want it to have some partial approach and then maybe we can change it, because from experience, it will not change. It will just stay like that.
No, of course, but the long-term solution could be to have this network status in the resource claim status.
A return claim, but that's
So
again fair. Keep in mind then what happens with this one, right? Resource claim status. Is that on the claim itself again?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Your pod is pointing to a resource claim, and in the resource claim you can find the IPs that have been allocated, the MAC address, and stuff like that.
I'm not.
Is there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Lionel, is there a way to make that extensible? Because one thing that I'm thinking about is, well, definitely from net attached fspec perspective, people use the status allocation quite a bit. It's definitely relied upon. And one thing that we have found over the years is that there are more things that people want to add there. Lionel, do you think there's a way to make that extensible, that like we could have maybe some primary fields and then some way to like package some additional arbitrary data in there, or that there might be a way forward to like extend that over time?
So for having this network status in the resource claim, I think it has to be discussed with the DRA first, and it will go together with the type of the resource claim. And I think Multus is a good experimentation, that we know what are the primary fields that the people wants to have in the status, and then we can have something that is completely open, so people can add whatever they want for their DRA driver implementation.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm only asking because that sounds like a very practical way forward with DRA to have that the status there. So thank you. That answers my question. I appreciate it.
You see that as a valid thing, Doug?
I mean, I see it as a way to move forward in that direction. I mean, I feel like for usability generally, the way that we have it laid out here, that you would see that directly as part of the pod spec, I feel like is very intuitive to people. And I feel like that's a general problem in Kubernetes networking space, is it confuses people. It's challenging to figure out what's going on. You need specialized knowledge, etc. So that would be a layer of abstraction, because you'd have to say, hey, you have to go look this up in the resource claim, which to me is counterintuitive. But it is a potential place that we could do that if we couldn't get this kind of status annotation as part of the pod.
So I am looking at it as well from service support, like in the future, right? Keep in mind today, service, the endpoint slice controller listens on pod and looks at pod, unless we create completely something of our own. That will be the case. If not, if we want to leverage existing items, this is what endpoint slice uses: pod IPs, those two fields.
In any case, you will need to have a new implementation of your endpoint slice controller because of this new networks field. So,
of course, Lionel, but that's a small step, and basically adding support for this list is it's a small change in Go code to, okay, now instead of using at pod IP, see whether networks is defined. If it is, grab same stuff from there, and basically even before you go support for multi-networking, if you have networks, grab the one that has default defined in it and only use that. That's your partial implementation for this support, right? So basically backward compatibility, you don't change anything, just ensure that for now, just use the default, because that's what we do today, right?
Yeah, of
if you
course.
don't want to
Yes.
support for the other ones. And that's one step. And this is just like Go change code. So small for loop slightly changed of an if. What you're proposing, if we were to have the status in the object, that means, oh, now you have to go and watch this other object. Now you have to cache that other object. Now you have to double your memory's in footprint. And that's a bigger problem than just this, right? That's the difference.
Yeah, of course.
That's
I mean,
that's what I'm looking at right here, because the footprint, because you double the footprint, right? I'm watching the pod and I'm watching those. Even worse, because then I have to watch those objects, and those they're not they're individual per interface. So there will be, let's say I have every interface, every pod has 2 interfaces. I have double the objects I have to watch, right? Because here I watched only pod, and now I have to watch every claim.
yeah,
that's
a drawback
the
of
kind
the
of
array.
yeah. No. So this is why I'm pushing towards having the status here rather than, and that's fair to say that might be hard to swallow, but I would like to introduce the type field to be hard coded and identified by the core to say, okay, this is the networking. If we cannot push that, that's already hard to swallow as well, because that means what that class may be, to give you more highlight. What does that class means if I have that class? That means that I can go, let's say, to network policy and have a field network claim. And now I want to apply my network policy to specific network claim. And then I can reference the claim, the template that that refers and corresponds to specific network. That's the ultimate goal here, because what we are trying to achieve here is have a handle for the network. And that's how we achieve it, because otherwise, if we cannot achieve that, this whole basically work group here, what we're doing is no. It's having just a small field in the pod. It is useful. I'm not saying it's not, but that's not the point. Just having small UI changes. The goal of this thing here is to have a handle to a network. So then I can go to I can commonize across the whole kind of industry that gateway API, I want you to run on multi-networking. Go and add a claim network field into your stuff. Go, or a network policy, do the same. Some other stuff, and then we can all unify it on one identified network representation and handle. Otherwise, that's not the point of this effort. And it's,
I think
you see that?
I think having the network class type would be easier, because it would represent a pod level resource type. And if you have other type, it could be PCI device that is a container type device or a resource. Volume is a container resource type. So there will be different handling. So that's why having this type and this network type would be a bit easier, in my opinion.
Yeah, and yeah, that's true.
And for what it's worth, I mean, this is my own goals and use cases and analysis of our gaps with net attached F is, yeah, tighter integration with these ancillary functionality that people expect, like services and network policy is definitely a goal of mine. So I want to make that worthwhile, but also, yeah, usability is something that I'd like to improve too, and having a intuitive design.
So Dak, let's assume that a scenario. We have 5 more minutes. If we were to just have, let's say, even not, we will not have anything. Is that the value added from your point of view? If you were to have, okay, Go, you have the array, maybe K9 in the future can adjust to that, and we would have the type network, and that's the only thing we could do. Do you see a value added in just that? Now you move away from annotations, now you define everything in here, but that's it, right?
So, hold on, you're saying we would have the network object, but we'd have no changes to the pod whatsoever?
So yeah, exactly. So the pod, basically you have the claims that's in already. So DRA has their stuff already, and then you define. So basically you move away from annotations on the pod, and you specify everything on the through the DRA, right? Do you see that as a value added from Multu's point of
Man,
view?
I see that as a worsening the user experience. I mean, right, like at least the annotation, like as somebody that's creating a deployment or pod or daemon set for Kubernetes, you see it right there, right? There's no abstraction of it. It's
Yeah.
I'm attaching to networks A, B, and C. Now would have to go look it up in another place what I'm actually attaching it to. It's like I heard the like PHP inventor guy. I know PHP is not loved, but Rasmus Lurzor, I heard him say something like in like 2003 or something like that, which is like, don't go and abstract all of your SQL queries into like some methods when you can just have the SQL query there, because you're going to come back to it in a few months and then you're going to have to dig through more code to find it. And that always stuck with me.
Yeah.
Like it's like I'd rather just see what's there in the place where it is rather than have to go look it up in 2 other places or whatever. So you know, that's one of my fears with these efforts is that we're
Yeah.
trying to get it closer to core, but then we're pushed away and we wind up making it worse. So
So that's if we were to do that. That's my that's why I'm trying to push towards the more changes, because that will be the trade-off. Okay, you have this more slightly complex, obscure configuration, but you get the pod IPs, you get the integration with other objects, you get some value added. I would assume then the cost might be worth it. Otherwise, I don't see the. I'm on the same opinion, right? If we just say, okay, use the array, oh, now you move away from annotations and now you do this. I don't see the value added in this. This is just, even as you said, even worse, because you obscure everything behind this. Oh, I don't need it. I better do it through the annotation and have my own CRDs already, which I have to point through the DRA. So that's my opinion as well on this. Any other opinions, folks, in the room?
I think the thing that we would gain to make the devil's advocate would be scheduling and ability to what the array brings, like those and also a bit more type checking. But yeah,
that's fair. I'm missing that point. That's a fair point. Yeah, we are gaining this scheduler, kind of the scheduling mechanism that they introduced. We could leverage that to state, okay, node selective network availability, right? So I can say, okay, this network is available on those pods, on those nodes only. That's fair. Yeah, you gain.
And some kind of flow control as well. So you can wait for a network to be ready on the pod. So you can introduce a bit of logic like that. But I would also agree on the fact that this is probably thin from the standpoint of someone developing something that might require multiple networks. The things that you care about are your IPs and less where you actually deploy your networks. Agreed.
Yeah, no, just to add, no, I mean, of course, we would like to explore all the options where everything is, as you mentioned, not a hook into each other. You have the routing, whatever, if it's kube proxy extended controller for whatever reason, the endpoint slice API need to cater for this one, and of course, hopefully scale as well, because I'm thinking about that now. When you said multiple PVCs, network claims, and then the network policies and the services as such, they need to play with each other, which means beyond the DRI, the network specific artifacts or attributes need to be outlined as well. Not only the scheduling and then you have the claim, but not have visibility on the status, what type of networks, IPs, how they hook to each other, because later on these things will have to work also when you do troubleshooting or collecting the data, how the traffic flow, where to where, and so on. So yeah.
All right, folks, we are at the time. I think we have some more topics on discussion on this one. Let's think through what other items we want to, or we see as a gaps for DRA, and let's continue discussion next week. I will try to capture what we just discussed in the notes as well, so that we have it called down. All right, thanks everyone. Oh, and Thomas, you asked about, I'm not sure he dropped. Oh, you're still here. The recording, as I mentioned, you have a link here to YouTube recordings, and the recording, last week's recording should be, I'm not sure whether it's already on. Oh, I'm not sharing, I'm sharing wrong screen, sorry. Sync 23, what I'm looking at, second. 24. I think that 24 isn't there yet, but in the meeting notes, maybe here, share this tab. So this is the sync, and 2024. There are 7, but basically search for here and it should show up here. I think 04 was the last week. Yeah, 04. So 04. No, not yet, not any. But basically, there's a link in the recordings you can grab, and they are all there. And it takes time to zoom to publish them there, but yeah. All right, folks. See you next week.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.